The war had taken everything from Aldric Voss except his name and a handful of coins. He had served 12 years under the banner of the Iron Throne, not the glamorous kind of service they wrote ballads about, but the grinding, thankless kind. Carrying messages through flooded valleys, digging graves in frozen earth, standing guard over supply wagons that nobody ever attacked. He had never been a hero. He had simply survived, which, in his experience, was harder than heroism and rewarded far less generously. When the peace treaty was signed at Bryn Mawr, the army dissolved like salt in rain. Officers got land grants and titles. Veterans like Aldric got a leather purse with 12 copper coins, a handshake from a man whose name he never learned, and a direction pointed away from the capital. Go home, they told him. He had no home. The village he'd grown up in had been burned 7 years ago, not by enemies, but by accident, a cook fire that got loose on a dry summer night. His mother was dead. His brother had married a woman in the eastern provinces and made it very clear, through a letter written in someone else's handwriting, that there was no room for a soldier in their new life. So Aldric walked. He walked for 3 weeks through autumn countryside, sleeping under trees, eating berries and the occasional stolen turnip. He was 41 years old, broad in the shoulder but thin in the face, with hands calloused from sword work and eyes the color of old iron. He walked without destination, which is a different thing from walking without purpose. His purpose was simply to keep moving, because stopping meant thinking, and thinking, in those weeks, felt dangerous. It was in the village of Dunhallow that he heard about the cabin. He'd stopped at the only inn, spending 2 of his precious coppers on a bowl of soup thick enough to stand a spoon in. The innkeeper, a red-cheeked woman named Berta, had watched him eat with the careful attention of someone who has learned to read hard luck in a man's posture. "You looking for work?" she asked. "Looking for somewhere to be," he said honestly. She thought about this. "There's a place," she said, "up on Greywhistle Ridge. Old trapper's cabin. Belonged to Morton Hale. You won't know him. Died 2 winters back. No family. The village technically owns it now, but nobody wants it. It's far, it's cold, and the ridge has a reputation." "What kind of reputation?" Berta shrugged, refilling his water without being asked. "The kind that keeps people from moving in. Monsters. Stories," she said, "which are worse in some ways. People can fight monsters." Aldric looked at his remaining 10 coppers. "How much?" She told him 12. He counted them out slowly, 2 of them still damp from the soup bowl. She gave him a hand-drawn map on the back of an old receipt and a key that looked like it had never been cleaned in its life. "The stories," he said, as he stood to leave. "What are they about?" Berta looked at him with something between pity and respect. "The ridge is on the edge of the Thornwood," she said. "Deep forest. Old forest. Before the war, there was a community of Velkai out there. You know what that is?" "Orcs," he said. "People," she corrected, without heat. "But yes, human word for them is orcs. They kept to themselves mostly. Traded occasionally. Then the war started, and the Iron Throne decided the Thornwood was a threat, sent soldiers in to clear them out." She paused. There was nothing to clear out. The Velkai had already gone deeper in. But the soldiers burned the edge of the forest anyway, to make a point. Her voice had gone flat and careful. "Since then, nobody from Dunhallow goes near the ridge. Not because of monsters. Because of guilt. It's easier to call something haunted than to admit what happened there." Aldric stood with this for a moment. "I was a soldier," he said. "I know," said Berta. "That's why I told you." The path to Greywhistle Ridge took the better part of a day. The autumn had turned the hillsides gold and rust, beautiful in the impersonal way that nature is always beautiful, without caring whether anyone is watching. Aldric's pack was light: bedroll, fire kit, 3 days of hard bread, the clothes on his back, and 1 spare shirt. His sword he'd sold 2 weeks ago. He hadn't replaced it. The cabin materialized out of the tree line as the light was going orange and long. It was small, sturdy-looking, built from dark timber with a stone chimney that leaned slightly to the left as though listening for something. The roof wanted mending in 2 places. The garden had gone completely wild, reclaimed by grass and early frost. But the walls were solid and the door sat straight in its frame, which Aldric, who had slept in some truly terrible structures over the years, recognized as genuine virtue. He was 20 feet from the door when he saw the shape at the gate. At first he thought it was a pile of old canvas, a bundle of something left by a traveler, or perhaps a large dog sleeping. Then the bundle shifted, and the low sound of labored breathing reached him, and he stopped walking. He was unarmed. He was tired. He had 12 coppers to his name and nowhere else to go. He went closer. The figure at the gate was a Velkai, an orc, in the common tongue, though Aldric found himself remembering Berta's correction. She was a woman, he thought, though it was hard to be certain with the Velkai. He had little experience with them. She was large, as they all were, broad through the chest and shoulders, with skin the color of deep moss and tusks that curved up from a strong jaw. She was young, not a child, but young. Her hair was black and matted with what was dried blood on the left side. She was in terrible shape. The wound in her side was wrapped in something, cloth torn from her own clothing, he realized, but the wrapping had soaked through dark red and wasn't doing much good anymore. Her breathing was shallow and wet in a way that made his chest tighten with recognition. He had heard that sound on battlefields. People with that sound often didn't last the night. Her eyes were open. They were dark amber, like old honey, and they were looking at him with absolute clarity. She did not beg. She did not reach for a weapon. She simply watched him with the focused stillness of a creature that has calculated its situation exactly and arrived at an honest accounting. "I'm going to help you," Aldric said. He had no reason to. He said it anyway. Her eyes didn't change expression, but she blinked once, slowly, which he chose to interpret as acknowledgement. Getting her inside was the work of 20 difficult minutes. She could move herself, barely. Her legs had strength, or something that served for strength, but she needed support, and she was significantly heavier than she looked, which he wouldn't have thought possible given how large she looked. He made 3 trips to the cabin to prepare, kicking the door open, clearing the old trapper's cot of its dusty covering, finding the fireplace, and getting a small flame going with the kid in his pack. Then he went back and helped her walk. She didn't speak. He didn't ask her to. He put his shoulder under her arm, and she leaned against him with deliberate care, like someone who was used to managing their own weight and was uncomfortable surrendering it. Twice she staggered, and twice he held, and twice she righted herself with what he could only describe as dignity. He got her onto the cot. The fire was small but growing. He lit the cabin's single oil lamp from his kit. The lamp was old but had oil left in it, which he added to his growing list of small mercies, and looked at the wound properly. It was a sword cut, long and deep across the right side of her torso, below the ribs. Old enough to have started a fever, not old enough to have begun any kind of healing. She'd been traveling with it, moving while bleeding, which meant she'd had no choice, which meant she'd been running. "I'm going to look at this," he said, gesturing to the wound. "Is that all right?" She looked at him for a moment. Then she reached up and untied the improvised wrapping herself, with hands that barely shook. "Thank you," he said. He had basic field medicine. Every soldier did, by simple necessity. He had no proper supplies, but the cabin yielded. A small cache of dried herbs from the old trapper's stores, some still good. A clay pot for boiling water. Cloth that could be torn into strips. He worked steadily and quietly, cleaning the wound with hot water and hands he kept as gentle as he knew how to make them, which was more gentle than his appearance suggested. She made no sound. Not when he cleaned it. Not when he pressed the edges together. Not when he bound it tight with strips of cloth. When he was finished, her breathing had eased slightly. Not much, but slightly. He put another piece of wood on the fire and sat on the floor beside the cot, because there was nowhere else to sit. "My name is Aldric," he said. A long pause. "Serath," she said. Her voice was low and roughened with pain and fever, but the word was clear. "Serath," he repeated. Silence. The fire talked quietly to itself. "You were a soldier," she said. Not a question. He looked down at his hands. Old scars. The posture. Something in the way he'd moved around the wounded. "Yes," he said. "Iron Throne. Yes." Another silence. He watched her watch the ceiling. "You burned the thornwood," she said. "Your people." "Not me personally," he said. "I was in the Eastern Campaign." "But yes, my people." She didn't answer. He didn't offer anything further, because there was nothing to offer. Apology felt thin. Explanation felt worse. He had learned, over the years, that sometimes the most honest thing you could do with guilt was simply hold it, without trying to put it somewhere more comfortable. After a long time, she said, "Why did you help me?" He thought about this genuinely. "You were dying at my gate," he said. "That's my gate now. I paid 12 coppers for it this morning." So I suppose that makes you my responsibility. Something moved in her amber eyes. He couldn't quite read it. Perhaps it was what amusement looked like on a face arranged differently from his own. 12 coppers, she said. Everything I had. She turned her head slightly to look at him directly. You're very poor, she said. Thoroughly, he agreed. The fever came fully that night. He had expected it. He kept the fire going and kept cloth wet from the boiled water and laid it against her forehead when the heat rose, and he sat awake because sleeping felt irresponsible. She moved in and out of something that wasn't quite sleep, her breath evening and roughening by turns. Occasionally she spoke in the Velkai tongue, her own language, which he didn't know at all, low and continuous, like someone narrating a dream. Once she said a name. Oren. Clearly, urgently, and then nothing more. He did not ask. Dawn came gray and damp, the kind of morning that makes the night before feel very long. Aldric was stiff from the floor and hungry. He'd forgotten to eat, which he only noticed now that the adrenaline of the night had worn through. He ate half a piece of hard bread and drank water from the pot, and checked on Serath. She was asleep. Real sleep, deep and still. Her breathing was better. The fever had broken sometime before dawn. He went outside. The morning was cold, the thornwood dark at the tree line, the ridge quiet except for birds. His cabin, still a strange word, still strange to own anything, sat solid on its foundation in the early light. The garden was a ruin of frost-bitten weeds. The chimney leaned its interested lean. The fence gate where he'd found Serath stood open. He had nothing. He had less than nothing, technically, having spent everything on this place. He felt, for the first time in months, like he was somewhere. She was awake when he came back inside, sitting up against the cabin wall with the careful deliberateness of someone measuring their own strength. You should lie down, he said. I've been lying down, she said. He couldn't really argue with that. He put more wood on the fire and heated water for something that could generously be called tea, dried herbs from the trapper's store, some of which he was fairly sure were medicinal, and some of which were simply flavorful, and some of which he honestly couldn't identify. He brought her a cup. She took it and looked at it, and then looked at him. Are you going to ask, she said. About what? Why I was at your gate. What happened to me? Where I came from. She watched him. Who Oren is. He was quiet for a moment. You said that name in the night, he said. I wasn't sure you knew. I know. She wrapped both large hands around the clay cup and looked into it. Oren is my younger brother. Was my younger brother. She paused. We were trying to reach the deep thornwood, the old settlement, where the elders went after the burning. There were 6 of us. We were found on the road. Human soldiers, not Iron Throne, independent company, the kind that hire themselves out to whoever pays. Her jaw tightened. There was a fight. I told Oren to run. He ran. The others, she stopped. Aldric said nothing, because nothing was correct. I don't know if he reached safety, she said. I ran when I could. I ran until I couldn't. I ended at your gate. She looked up at him. I have been trying to decide if I am angry that I'm alive. And she considered. Not angry, she said finally. Uncertain. Alive is complicated. Yes, said Aldric. I know exactly what you mean. She looked at him properly then, the long amber look that seemed to take inventory of something beyond just his face. Why did you leave the war? She asked. It ended. That's not the same as leaving. He smiled, small and wry. No, it's not. He sat on the floor again, back against the wall across from her. I left because I couldn't find a reason to stay. Which sounds simple, but it took me 20 years to get there. I kept thinking there was something on the other side of the next campaign. Some version of the life I was supposed to have. He looked at his hands. There wasn't. There was just more campaign. And now, he looked around the small cabin. The crooked chimney. The mended roof. The frost-killed garden visible through the window. Now I have 12 coppers worth of cabin and a Velkai woman who called me poor to my face, he said. The thing happened again in her eyes. Definite amusement. This time, he was nearly sure. You are poor, she said. Thoroughly, he agreed, again. She stayed 5 days, which became 10, which became something harder to measure. The wound healed, slowly, imperfectly, the way serious wounds do, leaving her with a pull on the right side when she moved certain ways and a scar that would be significant. She regained her strength in the methodical way of someone accustomed to measuring their own resources, going from sitting to standing to short, careful walks in the space of a week. Aldrich spent those days learning the cabin. It was more than he'd expected. The old trapper, Morton Hale, had been practical in the deep way of people who live alone and far from help. The structure was sound. The stores were modest but real. There were tools hung in the back room that spoke of a man who'd known how to maintain his situation. There was even a small store of preserved goods, dried fish, salted roots, tucked in a corner that had stayed cool enough to keep them. He cleared the garden. The soil under the frost was good, dark and loamy, the kind of earth that wanted to grow things. He didn't know much about gardens. He started learning. Serath watched him work, from the doorway at first, then from a log he rolled near the garden plot for sitting. She didn't offer advice, but twice he noticed her looking at the soil with an expression he couldn't quite read, something between recognition and grief. "Did you have a garden?" he asked on the fourth day. "My mother did," she said. "The Velkai keep extensive gardens. We have methods, specific to our soil conditions, the thornwood light." She paused. Oren was learning them. He was better with growing things than fighting. She looked at the raw earth he'd turned. "You're planting in the wrong season." "I know. I'm just learning the soil." She nodded slowly. Then she got up, with the careful management of someone minding a healing wound, and came to crouch at the garden's edge. She picked up a handful of earth, turned it, smelled it in a way that seemed entirely natural to her. "It's good ground," she said. "For certain things. Spring would be your best start. But you could plant winter herbs now, along that south-facing wall. They'll establish under the frost and come early." "What kinds?" She named several, in the Velkai tongue first, then translating to the common tongue. Some he recognized, some he didn't. She described them precisely: leaf shape, smell, soil preference, the way someone describes things they learned by watching someone they loved. That evening they ate together for the first time at the cabin's small table, the preserved fish and some late wild mushrooms Aldrich had gathered from the tree line. He ate the way soldiers eat, efficiently and without waste. She ate carefully, minding her side. "Oren," Aldrich said. She looked up. "Do you want to find out if he's safe?" She was quiet for a long moment. "The route to the deep thornwood is 3 days from here," she said. "If he made it, and I believe he made it, he would go to Elder Vassa at the old settlement. That is the place we were heading. They would keep him. Could you get a message there?" "Not easily. The Velkai don't use courier services." A faint, dry edge. "Humans are rarely traveling that direction." "I could go," Aldrich said. She stared at him. 3 days out, 3 days back," he said. "If you're well enough to manage here." "Why?" she said. It came out not rude but raw, stripped of anything decorative. "Why would you do that?" He thought about it. "Because I used to be someone who followed orders," he said. "I'm trying to work out who I am when I'm not doing that. And I think maybe I'm someone who goes 3 days into a forest to find out if a young man is safe." He paused. "I think that might be a good thing to be." Serath looked at him for a long time across the small table, in the lamplight and the firelight, in the cabin on Grey Whistle Ridge that he'd bought for 12 coppers. "Oren is afraid of strangers," she said finally. "He'll be less afraid of a human who comes alone and unarmed. He'll be less afraid if you tell him." She paused, choosing. "If you tell him the soup at the Ford camp was terrible and that the Velkai make it better." Aldrich blinked. "Is that a code?" "It's a memory," she said. "Something only we would know." Her voice was matter of fact, but he understood what it cost her to share it. "He'll know it's real." "All right," said Aldrich. He left at first light with bread, water, and Serath's hand-drawn map. She was a precise and detailed cartographer, he discovered, her directions including landmarks and distance estimates that turned out to be exactly right. The thornwood was ancient. That was the first thing he understood, walking into it. Not old like a building gets old, but old like a mountain is old, in geological time, deep in its own history. The trees were enormous, their canopy locking out most of the sky, the light below them green and diffuse, and slightly outside the normal spectrum of day. He kept his hands visible and his pace steady, and tried to look like what he was, a tired middle-aged man with no weapons and no agenda. On the second day, he found the burned edge. He had expected it, intellectually. Actually seeing it was different. A stretch of land where the great trees ended abruptly in a ragged line of char and stubble, the new growth coming back tentatively, saplings and ground cover. But the old growth gone, just gone, and the absence of it something you felt in the air like a missing tooth. The burning had happened years ago, but the forest remembered. He stood at the edge of it for a while. Then he walked on. The settlement was another half-day deeper, and it found him before he found it. He became aware of being watched somewhere around mid-morning. A subtle thing, the quality of silence changing, the birds adjusting. He kept walking, hands out, no sudden movements. "I'm looking for a boy named Oren," he said, to the trees. "I have a message from his sister." Nothing happened for 30 seconds. Then a Velkai man appeared from between two massive oaks. Not old, maybe 30, with the same deep green-toned skin as Serath and a wariness in his face that Aldric recognized as the specific wariness of a people who've been given good reasons for it. "What sister?" the man said. "Serath," Aldric said. "She says the soup at the Ford camp was terrible, and that the Velkai make it better." The man's face changed entirely. Oren was 17, and small for a Velkai, still broader than most humans, but slight for his kind, with his sister's amber eyes and the particular grief of someone who believes they've lost someone and hasn't yet learned otherwise. When Aldric told him Serath was alive, the boy sat down on the ground where he was standing, right there in the settlement's common area, and put his face in his hands and shook with something that wasn't crying but needed the same amount of space. Aldric sat on a log nearby and waited. The elder, Vassa, a woman of indeterminate great age with white hair and a face like a detailed map of a long life, sat across the fire and watched Aldric with the measuring look of someone who has seen many things and categorized all of them. "You are the one who found her," she said. "She found my gate," Aldric said. "I just didn't close it." Vassa was quiet for a while. "You were Iron Throne," she said. "Yes. And now?" He looked at his empty hands. "I bought a cabin," he said, "on Grey Whistle Ridge. It needs a lot of work." Vassa looked at him, and at Oren, still sitting on the ground, and back at him. Something settled in her expression, not warmth exactly, but something adjacent to it, the kind of calculation that ends in a decision. "We have knowledge of that ridge," she said. "The soil conditions, the plant communities. My people have been looking for somewhere to establish a way station, a point between the deep thornwood and the human roads, where those who need to travel can shelter." She paused. "A cabin would serve." Aldric sat with this. "You're talking about neighbors," he said. "I'm talking about a practical arrangement between people with complementary needs," she said precisely. "Right," said Aldric. "Neighbors." Something that might have been amusement crossed Vassa's ancient face. Serath would be a suitable liaison, if she is willing. She has human language and some experience of the road. "She'd have to agree to that herself," Aldric said. "But yes, I think she might." He brought Oren back. The boy walked the 3 days with focused, urgent energy, barely sleeping, talking more as they went, about Serath, about the attack on the road, about the settlement, about the thornwood, about the way spring came there, the particular green of it. Aldric listened mostly. He was good at listening. It was one of the skills nobody had ever thanked him for. They came over the ridge in late afternoon, the cabin below them with its thin thread of chimney smoke. Oren saw it and started walking faster. Serath came to the door before they reached it. She had heard them, better hearing than humans, the Velkai, among other things Aldric had begun to notice. She stood in the doorway of the 12-copper cabin with her healing wound and her careful management of her own strength, and she watched her brother come up the hill toward her. Aldric stopped walking and let the reunion happen at its own pace, which involved Oren arriving at a near run and Serath catching him by the shoulders and then pulling him in with her good arm, and then both of them speaking rapidly in the Velkai tongue, overlapping for a long time. He went around them to the garden. The winter herbs he'd planted along the south wall had already begun to put down roots. Small, tentative, but real. Behind him, inside the cabin, he could hear Serath explaining something to Oren. The layout of the cabin, he thought, or the fever, or the route there. Then he heard Oren's voice, a question, and Serath's answer, brief and matter-of-fact. He didn't understand the words, but he understood the tone. That evening the three of them sat around the fire, and Serath translated for Oren as Aldric described what Vassa had proposed, and Oren spoke at length in the Velkai tongue, which Serath rendered in the common tongue as, "He thinks it's a good idea, and he also thinks you need to fix the fence before winter." "The fence," Aldric said. Oren nodded seriously and pointed at the fence and said something further. "He says the post on the left side is rotted through," Serath said. "He says he can see it from here." Aldric looked at the fence, then at Oren. Can you do carpentry? Oren spoke. Serath translated. He says he can do most things, and that he is a fast learner, and also that he would like to stay, if that is permitted. Aldric looked at the young man across the fire, 17, amber-eyed, still faintly red around the edges from the reunion, sitting in a dead trapper's cabin on a ridge with a complicated history, with nowhere safer to be. It's permitted, he said. Serath translated. Oren smiled, the large, unguarded smile of someone young enough that joy still surfaces without permission. Winter came hard to Grey Whistle Ridge. The cabin held. By the time the first snow fell, the fence was repaired, the south wall herbs were established under their frost blanket. The roof had been mended in both places, and the cabin had been expanded, not officially, but practically, with Oren's bedroll in the back room where the tools hung. The tools were used regularly now. Serath's wound healed to the scar it was always going to be. She moved freely, without the pull, mostly. She made 3 trips to the deep Thornwood settlement, establishing the way station arrangement with Elder Vassa, coming back each time with things. Knowledge, seeds, once a bundle of Velkai medicines that proved considerably more effective than what Aldric had improvised that first night. Travelers began to stop on the ridge. Not many, but some. A Velkai family moving south. A human merchant who'd heard there was a way station and arrived skeptical and left surprised. 2 children, unaccompanied, who said only that they were heading for the settlement and gave no further details, and whom Serath and Aldric fed and sheltered for 4 days without asking the details, and then sent on with a guide. Aldric fixed things. That, he discovered, was his particular competence, not building, exactly, but repair. He had a feel for what was wrong with a structure, for what it needed to hold. It was not entirely unlike the skills he'd spent 20 years applying to military problems. He just liked it better. In the evenings he was learning the Velkai language, badly, from Oren, who was a patient and frequently amused teacher. He could say perhaps 40 words. Several of them were probably impolite, given Oren's reaction when he tried them out. Serath refused to confirm or deny. One night in deep winter, with the snow up against the window and the fire doing its best, and all 3 of them in the small space that had come to feel, to Aldric, like something he hadn't had in 20 years. Aldric, said Serath. He looked up from the fence post he was mending by firelight. You told me you paid 12 coppers for this place, she said. I did. You spent 12 coppers. She looked around the cabin, at the mended walls, the repaired roof, the winter herbs on the windowsill, Oren asleep in the back room, the fire. Is it worth 12 coppers? He thought about this honestly. It's worth considerably more than 12 coppers now, he said. But that's not what I paid 12 coppers for. What did you pay 12 coppers for? He looked at the fire. Outside, the wind moved across the ridge, and the old cabin held against it, solid in its foundation, the crooked chimney breathing smoke into a winter sky. I paid 12 coppers, he said, to find out if I was someone worth stopping. Serath was quiet for a while. And, she said. Aldric looked at the mended fence post in his hands, the firelight on the walls, the sleeping boy in the back room, the woman across the fire with her amber eyes and her healed scar and her seeds for the spring garden. Still deciding, he said. But he was smiling.